Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Sorry we're starting just a little bit late. Call to order this Rules Committee of the Whole. Today is April 11, 2024. Right now it's 1:05 p.m. Would you take the roll? Well, let's just do introductions first. We don't need to do a roll. So, Mr. Salt.
Randy Salt.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Daniel Volin.
Anna Brawley.
Exalta.
Christopher Constant. And on the phone we have Mr. Myers.
Yes, sir. I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez.
George Martinez, present. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rivera.
Present.
All right, so very good. We have an agenda that includes service awards, employee of the quarter, a report from the chair, our ledge staff, and the clerk. Then we have a brief update on community council boundaries, a very truncated brief update on the committee plan, and then discussion at length about the capital improvement projects, capital improvement budget timeline. For councils, a briefing from Matthew Hurt about the Supreme Court ruling on social media, and then members' discussion on pending business, which will hopefully have sufficient time to tackle a couple of items. So with that, the fun part, we'll start with a service award for, I had it. I don't know where it went. Oh, here it is. For my friend and Vice Chair, Ms. Salatal. This is a congratulations for 5 years of service to the municipality of Anchorage with a 5-year pin.
Thank you.
Glad to be able to deliver that surprise.
I feel all 5 years. I feel them all
Some
in
of
my
those-
bones.
Some of those 5 years were 2 years at a time. So, yes, okay. And then next, also a very nice thing we get to do, employee of the quarter. So we had a number of great nominees, and the nominees who weren't selected this time will remain in the flow to be awarded because of their great service. And this go around, we are going to award Travis Turner as employee of the quarter. But before I hand off all the goodies, and I want to speak as to why. For me, the application was easy for one very specific reason, and a number of very more general reasons. But the very specific reason is, for a number of years, we struggled having our minutes done, and the minutes have gotten so far behind, like by 10 months, a year, like a long, long time. And with the fact that we are having so many meetings these days, keeping up with that is a Goliath task. And I actually never thought we would see a day when we were caught up, and we're caught up. And that is because of your painful time and effort listening to all those meetings. Again, after sitting through most of those meetings, which gets to the more general elements, which include Travis is, in fact, the last one working at nearly every assembly meeting, no matter how late we go. And that is a work that's part of the job, but it's also above and beyond, because when we're all exhausted after having racked our brains and tried to get all the work done, he has to stay and clean up the mess, and we have to leave that chamber how we found it. And so for that work, you're definitely being recognized, as well as you've been around a long time. You sat through the darkest days in that chamber with us. And with all of the things that came along with that, we are recognizing you as employee of the quarter. So come get your trophy that you have to build. Trophy.
And can we have you stand over here? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so Just one sec. So I'm going to hold the reports section of the agenda for now and come back to that as soon as we have some materials that are printed. But I'm going to move on to unfinished business, which brings us to Mr. Hess and your update to us on community council boundary changes.
Thank you, Chris. I won't need 15 minutes. So the planning department has been working diligently to try to get back on track with the Community Council Boundaries Project. But as I'm sure you all are aware, they're shorthanded like every other department. And they've had a lot of projects coming up regarding Title 21 amendments. So the Community Council's project has been on the back burner for a while. They're getting it back on track. So Ryan and Tom in planning have been trying to prioritize the completion of the GIS mapping of the community council boundaries. So the GIS team is having to recreate the old community council boundaries and then put overlays on of the proposed changes. And unfortunately, you know, they are committed to allowing community councils a minimum of 2 months to review and comment on the proposed changes and the boundaries once the maps and documents are released, excluding June, July, and August. So they were hoping to have these documents available for the public and the councils early in April. And I did get an update yesterday afternoon that they're having some difficulties with the GIS mapping. So it looks like this project is going to be pushed into the fall and winter. So I wouldn't anticipate this coming to the assembly. I think it'll be closer to the first of the year because you're going to be getting into budget in November. And they want the community councils to have time to review the proposals before it goes to planning and zoning. So the goal was to have it to planning and zoning in September. Honestly, I don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be closer to late October or November before it goes to P&Z, and then probably around the first of the next year for it to come to the assembly. So frankly, it looks like we will be within 5 years of the next census before this project is completed. It's taken a lot longer than it's ever taken in the past. But planning wanted to make sure they did a thorough job of outreach to the public and that they allow community councils ample time to review and comment.
So Ms. Brawley and then myself.
Yeah, I had a question, and I know it's, I'm not going to talk about timeline. I was just curious, based on what's already been done, because I haven't tracked this super closely, is there any kind of analysis or summary of basically what I imagine there was some kind of baseline analysis of maybe, well, definitely total population by community council, and then also the demographics. And I don't know if that was looked at in this boundary change or if there's any, because what I'm just curious is how many people are in each community council area now. And then, was there any kind of looking at the census or anything around that? And that's more like the background information. So if that's available, I'd like to see it.
I will ask planning and get back to you. I'm not sure because the population within a council district is usually not a consideration. Some have 3 times the population of others. It's more about neighborhood cohesiveness and connectivity rather than population. Some have very large geographic areas and small populations. Others have small geographic areas and large populations. So they vary greatly.
Yeah, thanks. And I know it's just a fundamentally different process than something like reapportionment that it's driven by the population versus the geography. But I just wanted to see, because I was curious, and I imagine that was produced as part of at least the baseline information. So I just wanted to, if I could get a follow-up.
I would recommend that you coordinate to the actual planning staff doing the work and kind of insert yourself there a little bit to understand their methods, because Daryl's our liaison, but they're doing that level of the work. And I think it would be wise and prudent and educational to tap into what their thinking is. Ms. Bronga, I'll hold until you're done. Go ahead.
So do you believe that they might have the plan ready to show community councils by May? And even if they don't meet in the summer, if they were to see the boundary suggestions, they'd have the summer to digest and think it over, and it could speed things along a little bit.
So the goal was to have the public document, the review draft, and the maps available to post online and to release in early April. That's not going to happen, but I suspect, personally, I believe they will be released sometime in May. So the public, the general public can review, community council members can look at it, but they want to allow community councils a minimum of 2 months as organizations to talk about them in their meetings and to potentially pass resolutions or entertain motions regarding the proposals, excluding June, July, August, because a lot of councils don't meet. So that was the intent. It doesn't mean that the draft report won't be out until after the summer. It just means the community councils will be allowed past the summers to review and comment.
A few more people in the queue. Mr. Salt.
Thank you. I would just stress to try to get it out sooner rather than later, because I'd hate to see this drag on in the next fall. And I know there's one boundary change I was requested in 6, and I think both community councils were amenable to it. So I can't see a lot of rub points, at least on that one. But you probably know better where the rub points will be across this municipality. So
Frankly, I don't think any of them are controversial. All of the proposed changes, I think there's only 5 or 6, and the neighboring councils agreed on all of them. I think the problem is getting the maps produced, getting the report done. It's the staff time has been the problem, frankly, getting, the planning staff being able to complete the work.
So I have myself in the queue, and I'll just address a couple of things. I think that it can fairly be stated that there is a base of evidence to demonstrate that our community councils are enforcers of inequity. And we have some work to do to figure out how to make sure they're forces for equity, not inequity. And what that looks like, I think I just heard something shocking, that there isn't a basis for population equity and balance, but instead you have a group of a neighborhood that has all of this vast land tract that has equal voice as the community that has 40,000 members in their community council, which makes me really think of that Senate structure in the US government that is just inherently counter-democratic and counter-public process, and results in certain areas getting greater benefits and access and control than others, where that's the opposite of what was intended. So it's a very interesting element of conversation that we need to grapple with, the fairness of the voice in our municipality. And it probably does have more to do with the way we decide we're going to draw the lines than anything else, because those lines have historically been the generators of inequity. The haves, the have-nots, the us's, the thems, the people who believe land has a bigger vote than people. So that's just a philosophical issue. Mr. Weddleton has a principle that he likes to propound that I completely agree with, and I'll talk to the planning department about this. The municipal government does not stop in the summer. We do not take June, July, and August off. And I believe community councils need to understand that if their business is a priority, their bylaws allow them to take the matter up at a special meeting. They can do the work. And so that's a topic. And I understand why the department is kind of bending over backwards to provide months and months, and now 3 more months on top of 2 months of input. 6 months for a pretty straightforward process after we've already been on it for a couple of years seems overmuch. And I think it plays into this idea that community councils always tell us the assembly shouldn't do anything with zoning until after the summer's over because we want to go on vacation. And that leans back to the first point. That's where we get the strong inequity. So there's a lot to think about here, and I'm hopeful that some members will be able to take on a project. I don't even know that I'll be on this body long enough to accomplish the level of what needs to be done to fix that problem after some 45 years or 40 years they've existed. And then finally, off the topic, but germane, we have our own realignment process, just so that folks are keeping that in their mind. That's coming. It's a very small realignment of reapportioned boundaries that will hopefully reduce the number of ballots that have to be printed by conforming to the state's final plan map in some places, and also a conversation in which we discuss when our elections official has been confirmed after he's done this acting process through the election, a review of whether we should separate the LRSA ballots into a separate election in a later time in the year so that we don't have 130 or 150 ballot styles during our election, because that creates so much drama and work. And so I want to just wrapped into this whole conversation, those are the threads that I see are pretty essential that we figure out in the next many months. So not to say you haven't done a great job, you have, Daryl.
So I just want to comment. I know Anna and Daniel want to initiate a conversation this year about community councils, which I've talked to several long-term community council, individuals who are involved with councils, and they think that's a great idea. A lot of us do, because it's long overdue. But I don't think the issue is necessarily the boundaries. The issue is, how do we engage people? Because I've lived in Fairview for 38 years. The neighborhood is 80% renter, less than 50% Caucasian. And Chris, as you know, the council tends to be 95% white property owners. And, when I was the council president, we printed off 1,200 letters and went door to door, went to the churches in the neighborhood. We got 2 new members. So I think it's more important, how do we engage certain segments of populations and neighborhoods who for some reason aren't engaged or don't feel like they're welcome. Right. I think that's an important conversation, right, more so than the boundaries.
I don't think I would disagree in the sense that, imagine you're in the Northeast Community Council, which has 40,000 members. You can't just print 40,000 letters and walk door to door and invite your neighbors to participate. You just can't. And so there's a practical function as well. 8,000 or 1,200, it's hard. 40,000 is impossible.
So I will say the Boundary Review Committee discussed the Northeast Community Council and that proposal. And what the recommendation was that the Assembly, I believe the recommendation was that the Assembly give serious consideration to creating a separate community council, to splitting off part of Northeast, if a group of residents organized and petitioned as is required by the code, that the committee thought it would be that the Assembly couldn't create a district and then ask individuals to come forward and petition, that those individuals, if they want a separate council, there's a conversation going on with a lot of people in that area, they need to petition. They need to have the public meetings, draft their bylaws, and petition the Assembly for another community council, because there was a lot of concern. It's way too big geographically and there's too many people.
Right. So, and that's one approach, or the other approach is take a wholesale look at the system and ask questions about how it works, and then come up with an alternative plan that maybe has not yet been on the table. So I have Zalatal, Brawley, and then you want back in this, Margaret? Yeah. Okay.
So I recently met with the Anchorage Native Community Council. They're a group that is self-formed, and they don't feel like they're getting representation in their geographical community council. So I think, right, and there's like a housing club. There are these other groups that are meeting because the community council structure just isn't meeting needs. And so to me, one of the ways it doesn't meet needs is it's a defined day, time, right? It's like our meetings aren't always accessible, defined day, time, and you can't really engage otherwise. So I think the conversation around community councils has to happen. And like, how do we leverage technology things like Vote Buddy. You post a resolution on a community council's website and you've got a week, you get a vote, it's still secure, so that a wider cross section of the community, you tape them or you record them, right? So there's all these other times for engagement. Even as someone who goes to mostly 9 a month, I'm there for a split second, it feels like, because I'm running to the next one and I have to do all kinds of contortions with my own personal schedule to get to them. So I can't imagine, right? And it's my job, let alone someone who's got other things going on. So I guess, beyond just the boundaries, I think it's really important to think about the engagement. And, printing 40,000 letters feels like a campaign is what it feels like. It feels like, right, a really big thing. But the question has to be not only how do we let people know their community council exists, but what does it do? Why does it matter? I think that's a big one. And then finally, how can I be involved if I can't make this very particular time for a meeting that can be really difficult for me? And I actually think Midtown Community Council is a prime example of that. That is very focused on the business membership interest, and we rarely see residents there because it's a Wednesday at noon. And that seems to be really hard. And I understand it all has to fall in line with the charter and bylaws and those things, but bylaws can be changed as long as they don't violate the overall charter. So I think there's a broader conversation to be had, really opening up, especially after the boundaries maybe are solidified, to say, okay, now what does it look like? So,
I think it's a difficult discussion because community councils are not part of local government. They're private associations. They're part of the local government process, but they are not part of the municipality, which is why the ombudsman doesn't have jurisdiction over community councils. And I've had discussions with the municipal attorney's office over the years. If we required, I know one legislator contacted me a couple of years ago and said, can the assembly put in a requirement in code that community councils have to have online meetings, hybrid meetings? They have to be online. I have to go to 6 different council meetings and I would rather be able to attend online. And the problem is, if the municipality requires community councils to have certain technology and to do certain things, they're all volunteers, they're not paid. And if the municipality requires that, would the municipality have to pay for that technology and for the IT personnel to assist them? And so that's part of the conversation too.
The
They're
Federation does
volunteers.
have the equipment
They're
now.
private organizations.
Yeah.
Some of them don't have places to meet. They don't have the equipment. So I think this conversation that Anna and Daniel want to start is pretty timely. There's a lot of angst about community councils in the city and how can we make them work better?
Thank you. So a couple more people still, Ms. Bronga, then Mr. Martinez. Oh, yeah, Ms. Bronga, then Mr. Martinez. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I flipped the name. So Brawley, Bronga, Martinez. Go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, and I'll keep this short and focused because I do want to have that conversation generally. But I think for purposes of this, one, I looked at the Boundary Project website. It doesn't appear to have any kind of demographic analysis. It was just what areas do you want to study? So I'm going to follow up. The second is the FCC, the Federation of Community Councils, did hire a new ED. I'm looking forward to meeting with her. I don't remember her name at this point. I'm just behind on email, but looking forward to having that conversation because I think that the FCC would also be the natural partner to talk about this as the convener of councils and the supporter, what is feasible administratively for them as well. And then also just to say 20 years ago, or at least 20 years ago, after the 2000 census, up to that point, a woman named Sue Feisen, who used to be at the municipality, I believe, did what was called neighborhood indicators and would literally take the 10-year census data, break it down by community councils, and publish a really thorough report of demographics, income level, like all these different things by community council specifically. That was not done 10 years ago. I actually did it as a contractor for MLNP because they wanted to look at, it was before the MLNP sale, and they wanted to compare their boundaries with, or their demographics with the rest of the city. And so they asked us to reproduce that report. So the last time that's been done, as far as I know, is 2011. And I would love to see another one of those done with the 10-year census, because I think it's really good data. And I think it would answer a lot of the questions I'm asking. and I'm not volunteering to do it. So
Well,
I-
I think the answer to that though is it's on us to fund it, to figure out a methodology to achieve that, or convince the planning department they have the tools to do it. So that is a policy question, I think.
I worked with Sue on some documents. I think that was one of them back in when I worked in economic and community development. So I'll see if I have copies of them. I did meet with Ari, the new ED of the Federation, last week. I gave her a lot of copies of all the ordinances and resolutions and AIMs regarding community councils over the last 40 years. She wanted to learn a lot about the history of community councils in Anchorage. And I will tell you, I was very impressed by her. And I gave her a heads up about what you and Daniel would like to do this year. And she definitely wants to be involved.
And it might be wise for us either through work session or at a committee to bring her in, introduce her. So a couple more people, then we got to move on. Okay, thank you. And Mr. Martinez?
Hey, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to highlight the beyond the intentionality of some of my neighbors. Let me put a little finer point on the question of the Northeast, to the point of the equity question that had been identified already, which is even in the conversation about the possibility of another community council in the Northeast corridor, the voices that are calling for that are already at the table.
Hmm.
And so what you'll have is those folks who are seeing their voices diminished by being included with maybe the economic diversity that the Northeast represents. And that presents a particular challenge to the way a good rubric needs to be developed, as has been discussed already. Thank you, Chair.
All right, agreed, Mr. Martinez. Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really appreciate this discussion. A few points from me. And I'm going to ask if folks in the room could turn up their mics. Thanks. So at some point, whenever it is appropriate, I think it would be interesting for us to have a work session with the new executive director of the FCC, because I think in part because I am not exactly sure how aware the FCC or existing council leadership is about these concerns that we've raised and that have been bubbling up for some time now. I know some folks are aware, other folks are hearing rumors and they're curious and they're calling me and asking me what's going on, what are these discussions you are all having about community councils. So I think at some point it would be good to at least have this discussion with the executive director. And then to learn more about the executive director and some of their plans. Years ago, actually 4 years, I have been talking to the FCC about their budget and the things that they could be doing with their budget. And they have just never really been interested in the assembly increasing their budget so that they could do more targeted outreach. They could have more technology, all of these things. So I'm hoping that maybe a new executive director will have maybe a little bit more of an open mind about different things that the FCC could and should be doing. And then the last thing I will say is, as we have this conversation about restructuring community councils, I think it's really important that that conversation does not, and I'm probably going to get crap for this, but that conversation cannot center current community council leaders. Because if all it does is center current community council leaders, then we're going to be stuck with the status quo. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah, Mr. Ray, I would only say one additional element. We in fact did increase their budget from about $70,000 to $200,000+, which is how they were able to afford an actual professional leader. So notwithstanding your comments, which are accurate and true, there was an increase recently. Okay, anyone else on this topic? I think there's a good sense of where folks are going. And so now the question is, how do we get there? And I really appreciate this conversation. So next we have a brief update on committees pretty soon. Go ahead.
Very brief update on committees. This is just an updated draft in front of you from after our last rules committee meeting. We presented a plan. You all gave a little bit of feedback. So we added goals, and then under stays the same, we removed enterprise and utilities, since that was one of the ones that changed. And then CEDC, I think we're going to move to monthly meetings. So this just wanted to get this back in front of you, make sure you all agree. And then after reorganization, this new plan can be implemented.
Okay, other questions? Any questions? This is a very brief report because we're going to have our standard annual reorganization vote at our next meeting, and you never know what could happen. So we don't want to do too much to get in advance of that. So Ms. Braga and then Ms. Alto.
So after the vote at the assembly meeting, then maybe, I'm just wondering when this might health policy and public safety be wrapped together just for planning purposes. I don't want to invite anyone to a health policy meeting
Right.
next month if we're changing.
I would say it could be done soon, but it's subject to change if I'm not reelected chair next week or 2 weeks. And so, but notwithstanding that, then it could be in 3 weeks. It could be the next meeting. And so the goal is to implement this plan, no matter what happens, hopefully it's well enough reasoned that the body agrees. So, Ms. Zalato.
Thank you. For the newly called Infrastructure, Enterprise and Utilities Oversight Committee, I want to just make sure if it's Public Works that it includes maintenance and operations. So I think that's a key piece to that. And it kind of goes to show that's where snow ended up anyway. And then the other one here is, I'm not seeing it, if real estate lands anywhere. And that might be a consideration. Real estate's come up a couple of times, whether it's HLB or otherwise. So just something we can think about.
I did have a separate document with just my handwriting scratch notes where I did match every department to a committee, so I can maybe make that a more formal document to share.
Okay, and I understand real estate might come to CEDC, but Ray, if you're going to talk about infrastructure, you can't necessarily take it out of the land.
Yes, it cannot be, unless you're going aerial, but then you still need footings. Mr. Rowland.
Thank you. I might have missed this. Do we have a timeline for when we want to make the health policy and public safety combination?
So that's what Karen just asked.
Okay.
And I think that the reality is it could be as early as next month. And so,
You just want to wait until
yeah, just,
leadership.
and
is-
something
okay, got
changes,
it.
then I don't want to, change everything and then change it again.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we are ready whenever.
Rotating.
Yeah, so
Yeah, so ready to go in 2 weeks.
cool.
So-
Thanks.
Okay, so is that everything on the topic for now? We'll have a more fulsome draft pretty soon and be done with this project for now, except for, I'll say that there is a discussion about looking at the dais and how everything's set up. We just moved a couple of members. It only felt like one member, but it was actually two because he's not seated yet.
It didn't feel good where I was.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I can muscle it out, but I'm like, wait, I miss my people.
Right, so
I'm so sorry.
we can figure it out. We can,
No, I mean, that wasn't being, I'm so sorry.
it's,
I wasn't saying that. It's just, you look at a different size of the dais. You have just a different view of things. It's very weird.
yeah, it's definitely different. So point being, there's still some room to make adjustments there. And so again, why don't we go ahead and start with the clerk and ledge liaison on their reports, if you have anything to report.
Sure. I guess my report is kind of more fully out in the media right now, but the regular election is nearly done. And we are gearing up for the runoff. public session of Canvas is going to be held on Tuesday, the 16th at 10:30. Then we will do a risk limiting audit on Wednesday, the 17th. And all of those documents will be provided to you at certification on the 23rd. And we certainly appreciate the team in the clerk's office who's been holding down the fort for the meetings for you guys, giving me the opportunity to focus on the elections. And the date of the runoff, I just want to make clear, is hinged on certification. It's to be held 3 weeks after certification. So, and then assembly chambers, AV project. We received one RFP. I think we actually received it in February. It came in over budget. And right now the budget analyst is working on contracting with all of John Crabb's contractors to get them on board with our department through December to give Matt time to put new RFPs out again after he's done with the 1Q budget and the elections are over and we have more time to think about it. He's done a in-depth view and has a great idea of what he wants to do, but at this point we just need the time to put the RFPs together and get them out on the street. So
Yes, that causes me great stress, but I know we're going to get through it. And because Mr. Crabb has earned his retirement, and we want to make sure he has the space to actually do that. So yeah, that makes me palpitate. Now, you just said something I think is very important for folks to understand. I want to underscore it. So we have told the public and published a runoff date, May 14th. And so what I heard you just say is that that date is subject to the certification. So
I would say that nothing that I've said has said
Okay,
it
not you.
specifically.
Yeah. You're right. I don't mean to put any words. We have broadly published that that is the date of the runoff. The media's heard, everyone's heard. It's on some calendars. We need a star next to it next time that says subject to certification of the regular election. Oh, good. If they're there, good. So I just want to underscore that then as a duty for us, we have to certify that election. It also would withhold bond issues from going forward, the charter change, and the seating of our new member. And so I just wanted, the real point was underscoring the fact that we have a duty to certify, and hopefully it happens in an early manner on the 23rd. And then on that subject, we have already discussed that, and I guess it's probably date dependent as well, that we won't take up the certification of the runoff election at the regular meeting, but we will be scheduling a special meeting, another one, for the purpose of certifying the election. And that looks to be, I believe I heard May 31st.
Right, May 31st. So as I was having conversations with people who have been involved with previous elections, the comment was made that if there was a changeover, having 1 month to do the transition is already very tight. And so I tried to keep the schedule as close to original as possible since it was already tight in the event there was a changeover.
Right. So just know that there are significant elements residing or resolving on our actions, and timelines are tight, and we will meet our duty. And so, okay, Claire. Thank you, Jamie.
All right. On the topic of elections, Allie has been doing a lot to support the communications for the elections, and she's done some really partnering with William on some really neat video, like cute little video clips of instructions on how to do different things. So those are on the clerk's office social media pages. If you haven't seen them, check them out. She's also been doing a lot to support the community engagement plan for the home initiative. And then we had a really great city nerd night on public finance last month. Thanks for all of you who attended, and they've all been recorded if you want to check them out later. The next nerd night will be in May 30th on transportation, the second nerdiest city government topic after public finance. We're also continuing the Food for Thought series. On April 19th, we'll have some of the agencies that provide housing for our most vulnerable neighbors talk about the Next Step program and Home for Good and that sort of thing to give you updates on that. And we continue to support the marijuana tax early Child Care and Early Education Fund implementation, and that group is working on a draft AO for the accountability board, which will be coming before you soon. We will also have that group give a work session in a couple weeks to update you on their progress. The alcohol tax strategic plan will also be coming before you, and we're bringing that before you before it's in its final stages so that you'll have some solid input on making the final decisions of how that looks, since you will be the ones using it. We've been working on advocacy on the state level for tracking bills that affect Anchorage and promoting the $4 million capital request. And then next up, if things slow down, we really want to do a lot more with our civic education program. So we'll be updating our Assembly 101 stuff online and videos and that sort of thing. And then hopefully starting a housing webinar series so we can dive deeper into some of these topics that are forefront on people's minds. I also want to go back to your housing action plan and just look at where you're at and help you line up the next projects for after the home initiative and some of these current ones get finished. And then finally, I'm working with Meg and Daniel on pre-approved plans. And I think we put out an RFP that was just too big and we didn't get any hits, but I think we're going to narrow it down and work on ADUs first, which could be really useful, especially like a really small ADU and then maybe medium size and then one over a garage. I think that's an area where the city wants to see more development, and perhaps having pre-approved plans for that will speed that up along. That's our summary.
Thanks. And we'll move on to the next part, but I will say that I was down in Phoenix, I think it was, and there are it's Portland. There are full industries that develop pre-approved ADUs. There are companies that do that business. And so it's good to know that we're catching up. Okay. So next I'm going to intro my report. My report is going to be mostly handed off to one of our attorneys, but the first part of the report, I want to speak a little about a procedural matter that happened at the meeting on Tuesday. And I think that it was late. I was tired. And I made a decision at the request of a member that wasn't out of order in the fullness of time, which is that instead of having a member make all of amendments at once, we did an amendment and then moved on. And that caused some friction and feelings, which I understand. And so I want to just speak to the idea that the goal is to make sure every member is heard. And if a member does a bunch of work to have amendments, we should let those amendments happen. However, the tradition for the longest time is a member would cede the floor after an amendment that took a long time so that other members could be heard in the conversation. Because if it's going to take an hour to get through one member's amendments, it's overmuch. And so, but I think I could have been better at facilitating that process. But as everybody remembers, it was tense after a long night and there was a lot on the table. So yes, please.
I think you did the absolute appropriate thing to stop me after one and go on to Felix and allow other people to speak. My frustration was that I feel, and you guys all, I know everybody's worked hard on this, that it feels like homelessness is we have shelters releasing and we have to have good plans. I just wanted to make sure that we just didn't stop. But I wasn't offended to cede the floor.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure everybody knows that it's a dynamic situation. We do the best we can, and I want no one to feel like they weren't heard is my mission here. Go ahead, Daniel.
Thank you. So I did walk over and ask the chair at one point during the meeting how that would work, because Member Braga had a few amendments and then she and I had a couple together as well. Because with Robert's rules, you only get in the queue so many times. You can only speak. So if a member has multiple amendments, then are they going to be allowed back in the queue again and again?
Yeah. So procedurally, the procedure is you can make any amendment you want on an item when it's before us. And with our tracking system, every time an amendment is made, it starts a new column, and on that you have 2 opportunities to speak, right? And so procedurally, if you're on the floor to take an amendment, then it's the amendment that you're speaking to, not the main motion, right? So you have 2 opportunities to speak to the main motion, and we track that. And so, but if it's for the purpose of making an amendment, then you get that. But then if you are long in your commentary on the amendment and take the opportunity to talk about the philosophy of the overall thing, it could be that we find that it goes into the first column because you spoke for 10 minutes and then you made your amendment, right? And so just if the purpose is the amendment, it does not count in that main stack, especially if you did your first intro, you've talked, you made an amendment, then you come back and have another amendment, then it's going to be on the amendment, not on the main motion. Until we get to the end, then you might have one left on the main motion as amended. So that's the tactical. We will probably figure out how to organize that in our notes in a manner that the clerk can be able to facilitate that more effectively. But I think we did it that way, and it was not clear to members because we have not had any of these issues where someone has 10 amendments or 7 amendments to roll through. And it's usually only in the budget time where that's like,
We started doing omnibus.
right. And so, right. So now we even have the omnibus. They don't even do it then for the most part. It used to be 30 amendments we had to get through one at a time. And so you would never be constrained. You don't have to give them all at once. Okay, Ms. Bry.
Cool thing.
Yeah, I think this is something, so I appreciate the discussion about kind of how the procedure works is through debate. The other thing that I've run into a few times now, and I feel like I'm learning better. Well, one is I'm time challenged, so I'll just say that. So I think a lot about time, but it is also really the reality that there's the procedure, right, which kind of contemplates that you have an infinite amount of time or that you're working through things one at a time because you have to. But also there's the reality that we end at midnight and we have those 1 hour debate, which we can extend. So the other thing is to think about, is it an individual amendment or is it an S version? And then what is the time that it takes to turn those around? Because I think that's the other thing that we all ran into, right, is we're already talking about this. It's very complex. Trying to sort it out in that moment is possible, but it is very complicated. And so I reflect on that often too, kind of, am I bringing something that is going to be a series of individual amendments, or what does that need to look like? And then that has to be part of the conversation because of our just the deadlines that we have in terms of time. And that's a hard one too, because it doesn't always play out that way in the moment. So anyway, and there's reasons why you might want to have separate votes. Maybe something is more controversial than something else, but just that's another consideration.
Yeah, so we're all figuring this out together and we make it one day at a time, and every meeting is an opportunity to figure out how to do it better. And so, Mr. Salt.
I think you'll appreciate this. I think some of this is an outfall of laying items on the table and rushing items to the floor. And it forces us to do amendments in the dark and make a pretty horrible sausage.
Well, 12 laid on the table. I was like, my head exploded.
And Christopher, I would also say that sometimes the clerk has to look into the crystal ball to decide if this is going to take, certainly certain topics we know are going to take a long time, but sometimes it sneaks up on us and we have to go back and remember who may have already spoken. So
that's why we have the tool and checklist, and I make sure, and that's, we record the time the debate starts so we can make sure we stay within our time bounds. And these are all systems that have evolved since probably Mr. Rivera was as the chair. Before it was a lot more free form, but we just have too many things going on. So yeah, and definitely it's challenges. Okay, so then the final part of my report, it's going to be unusual and it's of value. When we passed the authorization for litigation, we said that we would keep the members apprised of the actions that we're taking, why, and without getting deeply into strategy, because strategy should be done in executive session and we can discuss the possibility of that in another day. What I had asked Mr. Erickson with Landy Bennett and Blumstein to give us a brief report on the status of one specific item that we're moving forward with. So you will hear it first and be briefed and have a chance to ask questions, but know that the questions will have to be limited to not strategic. But with that, now we can hand out the letter, Mr. Erickson. We have the letter. You have the floor. You press the button for the green light. Press it, let it go. There you go.
Thank you. So this letter that's being distributed is, will go out today on behalf of the Assembly leadership and the Assembly, notifying Chugach Electric Association and Matanuska Electric Association, who are the minority owners of the Eklutna Hydroelectric Project, of the intention to file a motion to modify an order issued by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska that surrendered or required the municipality to surrender its vote on all decisions regarding implementation of the 1991 Fish and Wildlife Agreement. And this essentially requests everyone's consent to an expedited process in the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, and hopefully, to get that resolved as quickly as possible to return the vote to the municipality on that draft Fish and Wildlife program. So with that, I will let you read the letter, and happy to answer any questions about big picture items without getting into any litigation strategy or other things that should be discussed in executive session.
And I just want everyone to recognize we haven't signed nor submitted this letter. We want members to understand before we act what it is. Ms. Burley.
Yeah, I just have a question, just to confirm. So it sounds like it was an RCA decision or determination that the whole hydropower thing, meaning that we don't have a vote. So basically that's why they would have the authority to change that decision essentially.
That's right. The RCA actually required, as a condition of approving the MLNP sale, that the municipality surrender its vote under the 1991 Fish and Wildlife Agreement. And so the first step would be to get the RCA to modify that order to allow the municipality to vote.
So this is in the category of collegial efforts. Collegial efforts. So the members on the phone have asked for an email copy. If someone can help make that happen. Never mind, it's been sent. Thank you, whoever did that. So Mr. Salt, go ahead.
This doesn't by any way open up like the agreement to other types of negotiation, because sometimes when you ask for something like this, it opens up the entire agreement. Do you know?
This only requests the RCA modify its order.
And only a narrow part of the order, because the order is much more broad. And so, yeah, it's narrow. Anyone else? So I just wanted to, again, close the loop on when we took on this effort, as challenging as it is and continues to be, we did commit to keeping folks in the loop as we go along. And so it might be warranted at some time in the not too distant future to have an executive session where we discuss more broadly all the efforts and how they fit together as a complementary package. But this is the next thing. So, Ms. Braga.
I have not read this, but are we specifying who would speak for the MOA? Because we don't have that hydro person that they wanted. So are we going to specify a different position that would take that role?
If I believe that because of the ordinance that we passed last 2 weeks ago and overrode, that it would speak by resolution of the assembly. It would be the assembly, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's the ordinance 2023-131, and then the ordinance that was recently adopted and the veto overridden.
So effectively, it would take an official action of the municipality's governing body to be the position of the municipality. So it just would require public open discussion and a vote instead of things just happening and then we find out about it a long time later. So, okay. Anything else on this? Mr. Erickson, thank you for being present and thank you for your work. Next, on to the part that's, well, I'm going to save you, Mr. You're going to wait. There's one more presentation first. I'm very excited about this presentation from our counsel on the social media and the Supreme Court. But before that, let's have a discussion about the capital improvement budget. And we have about 20 minutes. Marilyn, would you come on up? So, Claire.
Hello. So this is a follow-up on a process that you all started last September. The Assembly working with the administration, added to your fall budget schedule a work session in September to review the 120-day budget memo, and the administration agreed to provide more of those background documents so that you can dive into the capital improvement budget and plan earlier in the year. As you all saw, it was improved, but there was still a lot of last minute changes with bonds and our requests to the state legislature. So we're going to have a work session in May, May 3rd, I believe, or May 10th, to just recap on the bonds and the legislative session and then talk about how to improve the process going forward. And we've invited OMB and a bunch of people from the administration to participate so it can be collaborative, because it's not really helpful for anyone when you guys are setting what's going in a bond in January. And so I guess that's about the update.
I have something to add just on the topic of the community council piece. You know, the way that it's currently established, the community councils put in their proposed capital improvement projects in March, April for the next year. And it's a really wonky process that has created a lot of negative feelings because there are ways that items get in and it's mystifying what gets in there after the council has done their work that's suddenly a council priority but wasn't. And what we thought was it would be wise to have the councils provide their input to us in a time closer to the budget season, if it's going to be for the next year anyways, so that there might be items we could reprioritize that are in our council's list and get them in or not, depending on what the factors are. And so the theory is really practically to provide a closer context of the council process to the budget process. So that's a thought. And Marilyn, we invited you here just because we know you are one party that is part of this process in building the budget. And I've been saying this, and a couple of us for a while, it would be lovely to move the entire bond process 2 months earlier, that we make those decisions so that if changes come, there could be an opportunity to significantly amend and yet still get out to bond council a project for review so that it can be involved. Anyhow, so we understand that's complex because everything is built on a timeline from, I think, the 90-day letter or whatever it is, the 120-day letter. So just an open discussion now. Ms. Alato?
Yeah, so my grand idea is to shift the CIP process for community councils to the fall, like October-ish, and leave it open October, November, December. And really, it would be not for the upcoming bond, right? So if we did that in the fall of 24, they would be thinking ahead to a year plus, right? Because what happens in January is the MOA sits down with the CIP list and picks its priorities. And it'd be great if it already had the community's priorities. So that means we have to get the community's priorities in sooner, right? And so and I also think we could get better participation. My home community council, it came up on Monday and they're like, oh no, CIP, right? The sun is shining. They're like, we have how many meetings left, and kind of use that, what I like to call back to school energy, where people are back into meetings and getting used to it. And there's a little bit of time. You could review what happened in the last bond cycle, what did or didn't get funded, what did or didn't make it through the legislature and the vetoes. Right? So you'd have a more fulsome picture as a community council going into that conversation, which also might get them maybe a little bit beyond just resubmitting over and over the same priorities. So that really won't affect, I think, the budget side of things, but it would affect the community process, but it would give us better information too, right? So if they did their list in 24, we are now in the 25 budget process, right? Those things are happening at the same time. We can go back, assuming they did it a year before, we could go back and look at their prior list and see in the proposed CIP, did those things get in there or not, right? So as we're working through their prior years things, they're starting their next year one, so that we're kind of running concurrent and we're having that more fulsome conversation. It's still all very related, even though we're kind of in 2 separate planning years. Thanks.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. I I would support that. And then I guess I just want to flag two other kind of weaknesses of the process now. I mean, we've already talked about this, but just to say, focusing only on community councils, because as I understand it, that's the only people or the only entities who feed into that. There is no general public process. And that's different than AMATs or some of these other plans where obviously councils can submit those things and we want to hear from them, but they're not the only conduit. And I want to use two examples. If your council isn't meeting at all, then your entire area does not get a weight on that. Or there could be situations where there's a group of community members who really want to see, and I'm going to pick on pickleball, for example, because I know this came up a few years ago, but some folks might want to really see a pickleball facility in a park, and then other people come to the community council and say, we don't want that. And it becomes this local conflict. And so what we have now is basically always the community councils gets the say and no one else does. So, and I'm not advocating for that project or whatever, but just to say that's a flaw. So we need to talk about how other people in the public give input beyond councils. And then the other piece is it really is a black box what the departments choose. And I know that's not, all of that is not going to be subject to, direct public input, but it does seem like there's the council side that feeds in and then no one really understands, but this magically all the department priorities show up and it seems like the department priorities typically get precedent. So just to say so right now we have a system that we ask people to feed into and then they don't have a lot of confidence that they have a say or even where to have that say. So I think moving the timeline up is really good. I just want to put those on the table as well.
I think it's the opposite. It's making the timeline earlier, but it's 6/1 because it's the round calendar. But I would only offer one caveat to what I heard you say, and that there is an opportunity for the general public to have input. We just could always do a better job of it. And that's in November when we approve the CIP and the CIB. Projects get moved in, moved out, moved up, and moved down, and that all the time. And the projects that make it into the I think it's the B, which is the one we annually implement, are the ones that get built this year if the basis is there to do it from, meaning a plan, the details, how it would be done. The ones that are in the CIP are the ones getting moved towards CIB. It's out 5 years, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. And so there is education and opportunity there. So my only caveat is councils get a special place, but the public always gets a place in the conversation. And we could always do better getting their input. Because as you saw with the school district vote, how many people did we have testify? 0. So, yeah, Mr. Vaughn.
So I want to make sure I understand. What is the process if a group wants to, if there's a group doing like the Cuddy Park Ice Chalet or something, an independent group, how did they get that request in there? Do they just come to us?
Yeah, they bring it to you.
And we give it to who?
You make an amendment.
I amend. Okay. But
That's one way, right? And then
Yeah.
Ms. Salta whispered something to me that is another way.
So it doesn't have an open call like AMATs, right? But it does have to be like that ready. So that's the thing, right? So then your amendment has to have all of the backside of it because, right, if you put something in the CIP or CIB and it's funded, someone's got to be able to implement it.
Right.
And so that's where I think there's a bit of a disconnect is we don't have that kind of vetting application mechanism like AMATs.
I guess that is my,
Right. So that's a simple solution could be,
Question.
right? A simple solution, simple Maryland, is create a portal where the public can nominate projects in the timelines that we do the community council efforts, whatever that ends up being, so that you can decouple your effort from the community council process. If you don't like it, it doesn't work for you, it doesn't on your calendar. So something to be said, an open call on a certain timeline that provides absolutely broad and equitable input opportunity. So I have first Mr. Rivera, then Ms. Braga, and then Claire. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So can folks turn off their mics? Thanks. So yeah, I think another thing that Meg and I have done pretty well with Midtown, it isn't so much with official groups, but like with maybe groups of neighbors where we send them to the community council and we ask them to ask the community council to put it on their survey, which is quite onerous, I will say, for the constituents who want to get something on the CIP. So I really do like the avenue of making something that doesn't rely on the linchpin of a community council survey that really aggregates everything we get from the community. So I do like that idea, and I hope it doesn't take 2 years to implement.
Right. I've been talking about the calendar shift for a couple of years. So since the pre-pandemic, actually, it's tricky. Next, I have Ms. Braga.
I'm thinking that the assembly contact email may be broader than the community council. And I kind of wonder if you shot out an email with the contact information of the different community councils and say they are going through the process of creating their project wish list. Please contact your community council to see how to be involved. Because I think we have a very small user group of Scenic Foothills Community Council people, but a lot more of them are assembly linked. Just a thought.
All right, Claire, you have the floor.
A couple of things. First off, this is a nice little teaser, but the May 3rd work session, you guys can get back into all these details again with more people from the administration here who can implement your ideas. So that work session is May 3rd from 1 to 2 p.m. And then I think you kind of touched on this, but one of the problems is if it doesn't come from a department, there's not really a project. And so like there's not a budget, there's not a implementation plan. And what we found is those ones don't get into the request to the state legislature. And so I think some of you had to chase that down in January to make sure that your request actually got to the state legislature. So I think if we can get it done earlier and get all the requests through the matching department, and the department has all the budget and everything, then it just goes through some other processes automatically, to get on the bond and stuff. You don't have to do it as amendments. So, I mean, hopefully by doing it early, hand in hand with the administration, when you catch things that your community wants that aren't in there, you're getting them added earlier, and you're not having to do it at the last minute without a known budget. So anyhow, at the meeting last fall, I committed to keeping the assembly more up to date on communications for the community council survey, and then you committed to tracking that process. So I don't know if Maryland has an update. I just checked with Sharon. I haven't heard if the survey letter has gone out to community councils yet. I think it got a little bit delayed because OMB asked IT for some really cool changes, which were to have each community council has a local list, and then they have a citywide list of their top 5 priorities citywide. So I'm not sure if that got added, but I know that OMB really advocated for that. So I'll let you know. I'm just checking with Sharon, and if Maryland doesn't know, we can let you know when that goes out. And then I think your commitment needs to be to really track your priorities and come into this fall session prepared with your list of what you want to put in the legislative program and what you want to put on bonds, and really know that pretty well going into the fall so that you can advocate for your projects.
Ms. Alto.
I don't know that we know in the fall always, right? We can go look when the final CIP surveys are complete, but I mean, that's our first opportunity. And we don't, unless the administration is open to changing whatever their plan is, we won't get our stuff in advance, right? There isn't a mechanism right now in our budgeting process for us to say, so like for Felix and I, 42nd Street is like a really big deal, right? It has been ever since I've come on the body. So we look for it, but we don't really have a natural mechanism other than just straight advocacy to go, hey, are you going to add it? Are you going to add it in? We usually wait for the list. We check it against our priorities to then, move through the process. So I'm not quite sure how we can bring the things ahead of time because we don't know, right? We get no visibility into it until the administration CIB is published.
I was saying if you have in your head and really strongly what your community wants, then you know what to check for when you get the written materials.
Okay.
But then also like that pickleball example, if it's a brand new project that no one's ever heard of, but all of a sudden is a community priority, then you should be doing some work, or maybe not you, it's not your responsibility, but you should make sure someone is doing some work to put together a budget and an implementation plan so that if you wanted to do an amendment to add it, there's actually a project to add.
Got it. Yeah, I think that some kind of, and goes back to the AMATs, kind of how you nominate something for the tip. There's a form for that, and that form requires you to have that specificity. So if you are a community member and you want to jump through those hoops, you are well aware of the types of information you have to pull down. And my understanding, for the most part, and Daniel will correct me if I'm wrong, is if you reach out to our municipal departments, they will actually help you, right, get the kinds of information you need. So I'm thinking some kind of combination of what we did for ARPA for applications with the specificity of what exists in that tip nomination form would really let us be in the driver's seat to say, okay, we're hearing from other groups outside of the community councils. Now we have the community council lists. We have the CIP, CIB, we're checking, we're doing our cross-checking, and we have these applications here, right? And we can start to slot those priorities in. Maybe they're a 5-year, right there in CIP for year 5, right? And then they can start to work back or whatever they might be. Because when we start to see those things, we can also start to create the right kinds of expectations. I think as we start to take in other projects and priorities, we need to figure out how to also acknowledge the ones that have sat for a decade waiting their turn, right? And strike that right balance. So I think there's some really great opportunity. And if we were starting to get those, we can then share them with the administration as soon as we have them, like, hey, this is looking really good. Would this be everything that you need? So thanks.
All right. Anyone else? Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, just very briefly, I really like that idea. And then just a flag with the legislative program, the situation we're in right now is several of the items in our legislative program are for the district priorities are great ideas. They may or may not be in our CIP. And then there's really no mechanism to talk about them because they didn't end up in CAPSIS because as I understand it, we just handed over the entire CIP list and all of those were put into CAPSIS, even projects for future years. And that's not the Assembly's job. We don't have CAPSIS access. So it's really down to the administration prioritizing those things or at least making legislators aware of what the priorities are. But also we do need to square it with our legislative process. And that would make our development of the program much easier too, because we've already had most of that discussion. So I do anticipate the development of the program is going to be faster and easier this year because of the work we did this past year to build the process in a helpful way. But that still needs to be, those things need to be squared.
Mr. Volland.
Thank you. Since we're on the topic of bonds, I'll just take this moment to briefly socialize an idea, since that's what we do at the Rules Committee meetings sometimes. I would like to create a separate standalone bond. Actually, let me back up. So this year, we brought forward an amendment to the Public Safety and Transit bond to increase the amount for the traffic calming program. We doubled it. I would like to take that out and do a separate standalone bond called Safe Neighborhood Streets and fund the entire qualified traffic calming list. And there's a scattering of projects in multiple districts. And I think it could be a really, kind of cool, ambitious thing to make our neighborhood streets more safe.
So I think the Assembly can probably figure that out on our side and then move those forward with specific language in the enabling documents. And I wonder, it would probably be area wide. So, and if it's a service area, then we have to get a vote of the people to create it. But I think if it's area wide, we can generally do it. So, yeah, so it just depends. Ms. Braga and then Ms. Zolotow.
I was kind of thinking about, and I think I mentioned it before, incentivizing those neighborhoods that are willing to get on board and change the density and get more housing. We select neighborhoods kind of a package. If you allow this, we're going to make your street very bikeable, walkable. But that might be a little outside the box.
Ms. Zolotow.
So I like that a lot. I've thought about a resolution that ties infrastructure investment to density. I've already had really deep thoughts about that. Back to Mr. Volland or Daniels, idea, right? And I spoke about this when we voted on the bonds. I think we need more categories like cemeteries, right? It's kind of this ongoing need. CASA, so it can have a CIP, CIB. I would still love like kind of like almost like a well-being bond, whether it's toilets or other things, right? Like there are things we need, and the more specific we can get about a bond and have a plan for them, right, over a course of years through our CIP, CIB process, it also then gives the community the opportunity to say, well, we'd like to see it here, more categories to start to nominate projects for, because right now it's parks, streets, kind of all or nothing. And that's tough.
On that note, and I'm going to close this out because we're going to run out of time now. I will just say that after what happened this year, it's a discussion that's been had that with every road project, we might add a toilet. And that way we have a process over time to implement them. And so that's a discussion that you probably will be hearing soon. And so because we have a bond that always passes, maybe we tack on a little bit more and get that major human need taken care of in alternative means. And so because what we know in Alaska, people just pull off to the side of the road and go. So, okay, Marilyn, I promised it was going to be lighter. There you go. We're done. And so thank you. Next, we have a pretty important briefing. Matthew, this is a briefing on, I don't know how to say that, versus Freed, Link versus Freed. This is the Supreme Court's ruling on social media, and just kind of an initial stab at us understanding what it means. Mr. Hurt, and we have 20 minutes for all of it.
We had some programming issues, but that's cool. Yeah. Sorry, I'm a stage, not film actor, so I'm not used to being mic'd. Sorry, I'm setting a timer. All right, so next slide. So you've probably heard about this case. It was covered pretty widely in the media, but this was the Supreme Court taking up issues revolving around public officials and their use of social media. And the facts of the case are pretty straightforward. There's a gentleman named James Freed who was appointed as the municipal manager of a town called Port Huron in Michigan. He has had a Facebook page since he was in college and maintained it ever since. And apparently he might want to seek some counseling for social media addiction because he exceeded the 5,000 person friend limit. That's no shade on anybody who has that many friends. I think
I feel judged.
I'm not, no shade, no shade. So basically he converted his page to a public page. And anybody who is much more savvy in social media can correct me on this because I'm not admittedly savvy. But he was confined to 5,000 friends when it was a private page, so he converted it to a public page, and that's why it says public official. His actual conversion to a public page was not apparently contingent on him being appointed as the city manager of Port Huron. And then he basically continued to maintain this one Facebook page, and it became sort of this mixed use social media platform where anybody could go on it, but he was still posting pictures of his family and, thoughts on Bible verses and things like that, but would also post press releases, seek interaction from the community, ask about what was going on. So it was really about as cross-pollinated as it could get. Next slide, please. This is Kevin Linke, a community activist who, as a member of the public, was going on his Facebook page and would start making political comments on some of the posts that were less apparently official in nature. So if Mr. Freed was posting a picture of his family out at dinner or something like that, you could count on Mr. Linke to comment, glad to see our public officials enjoying themselves while, the people of Port Huron are suffering through an unemployment crisis and things like that. And at first, Mr. Freed was just deleting comments, and then eventually got to the point where he blocked Mr. Linke entirely, which comes into some of the analysis towards the end. And Mr. Lincoln brought suit basically saying that this is a violation of his First Amendment right to free speech. So if you go to the next slide, this is basically the issue as the court articulated it. What we're determining here is the state action requirement for a violation of somebody's individual rights, right? Like if a private business takes an action, that's one thing, right? Like if you're a sportscaster for ESPN and you go on a tirade about some political issue on the air and go completely off script, you don't really have a First Amendment right to do that. Or you do have a First Amendment right to do it, but when the ESPN fires you for going off script, that's not a violation of your First Amendment right because it's not the state doing it, it's a private business. That's a requirement. Usually anytime you assert your constitutional rights, the first question is going to be like, how is this the government infringing on it? Because if it's just another citizen, we don't really care. People kind of have that right not to promote or listen to points of view they don't want to. So that's really the question here, is whether or not Mr. Freed's Facebook page and him blocking people, deleting their comments constitutes state action. And that really kind of boils down to whether or not this is an official Facebook page or a personal Facebook page. So next slide. The court actually doesn't wind up resolving it to Mr. Linke or Mr. Freed's satisfaction, but they do give us a test to use. All right, and it's a two-part test. The first part is, one, the person acting has to actually have authority to speak on the state's behalf. And this is one of the reasons why they didn't rule in this case, is because it's going to be pretty individualistic, and the Supreme Court doesn't want to set a precedent of having to decide this for everybody. So they're basically giving all the lower courts the test that they should use. Sorry. And then, so the real question is, do you have the authority to talk about the thing that you are talking about for the official body? And that's one of the good news for the members of this body, is that, generally we say that you don't have the authority to speak for the assembly. Your individual assembly members, when the assembly speaks, you do it by way of ordinance, you do it by way of resolution. There are ways for this body to speak in its official capacity. It is actually makes it more interesting for people who actually work for the assembly, right? Because it is, the communications director's job to speak for the assembly. So her analysis is going to differ from yours, or Dean's and mine may differ from yours, because it's our job to advocate legal positions for the assembly. So if we put something out there on our private social media accounts giving our legal opinion, which I don't do, but I do know lawyers who are a little cavalier about that. That's going to be much different analysis than you. The second part of the test, and this is the interesting part, is that it's an and, not an or. You have to be purporting to, or you have to be giving the impression or saying that you're speaking in your official capacity on something that you have the authority to speak about. And another thing I will caution about you, just because the assembly tends to speak with one voice through resolution and ordinance, it may be different if you are a chair of a particular committee and you're talking about things, right? Like you tend to have a little more authority, and the analysis gets a little more complicated. So I don't want to give you the impression that I can say whatever I want because I'm just one of 12. It's a little more nuanced than that. The other thing is that you do engage with the public, seeking out opinions, your constituency, right? Like when you go to community council meetings and things like that, right? Like you're still doing it in your official capacity because you do receive information as an individual in an official capacity. So you can use social media in that way in your official capacity. You can reach out and say, hey, what are people thinking about X, Y, and Z, this particular ordinance? So just because you don't necessarily make bold policy statements on your own, it doesn't mean that you don't speak on behalf of the in your official capacity as an individual member of this body. So a little caution there. So next slide. All right, so I just kind of got into the detail of it, saying like whether or not it actually fits within your job description. Next slide. And this is basically them saying,
Can we go back real quick?
Yep, please.
So I think that, just thinking as the legislative branch versus the executive branch, it's a trickier situation for an executive, right? Because the chief executive is empowered to speak on behalf of the interests.
I mean, yeah, it is one of the functions of the executive where they've been, where they have a clear duty that's been codified, either in charter and code to act on a particular issue. It gets, yeah, it's much more different than the legislative branch. However, if actively deliberating on a particular issue, or advocating on behalf of a particular piece of legislation or something like that, I think it's still, there's potential to run afoul as the legislative branch, but yes, I think the executive has a much more difficult analysis to do. And I think as the city manager, Mr. Freed's in a much worse position than I think he would like to be based off of this first step. Also because they tend to have much more precisely defined job titles than assembly members. You're broader. So next slide. Yeah, and so I think I've kind of beaten this dead horse.
All right. Anna had a question for you.
Yes.
Well, I guess maybe just an example to offer, and I'll use myself here, because I think, for example, posting on social media, Twitter, I'm not going to say X, I'm going to say Twitter, on activities at the legislature, for example. So, and this is maybe helpful for members to think about. So when I've posted about actions that they've taken, I'm not just kind of popping off with my personal opinions, knowing that what I'm talking about are things that I've been advocating for as an assembly member. But I've also not said, the municipality, other than things that are in our legislative program. So I'm speaking from the strength of the legislative program, the fact that that is the municipality's position. And so I'm staying within those bounds. And for example, when the shelter vote failed the first time, I posted, I'm disappointed. And I did take some liberty to say, but speaking from those grounds versus something where maybe I'm personally upset about that they did or didn't do, but I'm not posting in that same way with that context because it wasn't a municipal priority or, so anyway, I guess that's kind of convoluted, but just to offer, there's ways that you can express things, but just being very clear about what voice you're using and then what the bounds of what you're saying is. And then recognizing that we do have the freedom to do that, but then also what are the consequences of me saying that, right? Like not making personal attacks against individuals or whatever it is. So, yeah.
Then the second part of the test is basically whether or not you are presenting to the public that you are speaking in your official capacity. And this part actually makes it a lot easier and gives us some pretty nice guidance that we can give you. So if you go to the next slide, are you using the old one? It's the same one. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. So I inadvertently duplicated. Can I just hop on and present from there? Yeah. So take this with me. Thanks.
I'm gonna sneak through because I gotta go switch the TV.
Yeah, it should be on. So what? Escape.
There we go. Just give me a second.
Escape. There we go. All right. And the 2 disappeared. Okay, so full disclosure, because this was a multi-step process, I originally made this New Kids on the Block themed. But then I thought that was pretty unprofessional. And since it was going to be part of the public record, I didn't want Donnie Wahlberg telling you what step 2 was.
I was waiting for the Cartman picture. Speak with authority.
The authority. So Justice Barrett basically provides like some good indicia that they would look for to show when you are not speaking in an official capacity and when you are. And the metaphor that she used is basically it's one thing for you to have a backyard barbecue and to talk about things, even things that would come before this body, right? Like if you have friends over, like I assume people talk shop, I don't know, but I would assume. But it's clear that you're at a backyard barbecue you're speaking in your personal capacity and you can express an opinion in your personal capacity versus when you're up on the dais and you're actively debating an issue. It's a lot more clear cut in the real world. And she said in the virtual world, gosh, it's helpful if you kind of put up those same sort of signposts, right? Like if you put up a disclaimer that this is my personal Twitter account, right? The views here are expressed are mine and mine alone. Stuff like that will give you a strong presumption. The takeaway here is she's not going to say, you know, do X, Y, and Z and you're 100% golden good to go. But there are a lot of concrete things that you can do that are going to give you a strong presumption of either acting in an official and a personal capacity. And I kind of boiled them down to some best practice, not questions, best practices on the last slide, right? If you clearly label something as your official feed, that's fine, but you're not able to block people. You're not able to delete comments unless it's starting to get into unprotected speech, like, you know, actual threats, harassment, and that's a dangerous term, but unprotected speech, obscene speech, things like that, that can be regulated. Just because it's an official thing doesn't mean you are completely incapable of removing content. It's just, you're going to have to go another step further that they don't wind up going.
So quick
Okay,
question.
you've got
from
questions. Yeah.
Randy.
So under the personal, can
Mhm.
opine on political issues, but best not to discuss matters before the body. Because I mean, we all have relevant matters come forward. We use it as informational to
Mhm.
get the word out. Are you saying like, don't give our opinion on the matter, or where's that line?
So in the happiest of all possible worlds, right? Like I would have you guys maintain 3 accounts for everything, right? You'd have your official one, which is where you actively engage with the community and seek out their opinion to inform your opinions on matters that you're going to take up, right? Because that's where I perceive the real danger being for you. Because, you know, we've had this conversation in the context of community councils, I think, right? Like you go to a lot of community councils because you represent a lot of communities in your job. How do we know when you're going to the one in the community you actually live in and want to talk about something as a homeowner, right? Like, in that context, it's kind of what I'm trying to think of here, right? Like we need to, if you're going to go out and actively engage and get opinions and talk about stuff that you're going to do and that is going to impact your vote, that's going to send a message to the community that's like, hey, this is where I can engage with my representative. And if somebody who is his second cousin twice removed gets to be his friend and tell him what they think, why can't I? So that's why I say best not to. I don't think you're necessarily going to run afoul of it. And you can even put out information, right? That was one of the things that Justice Barrett pointed to, is that, like, you know, if you've got a Twitter feed or a Facebook page, which is where you put out press releases, I mean, like that's the first place they go, or it's the only place they go that citizens could get information, then that's really going to indicate that you're using it for an official purpose. And then everybody needs to have access to that. But if you want to put up a link to something that was posted to an official page, that's fine. If you want to put out information that way, that's fine. I'm much more concerned about you seeking public input, because then you're making and deciding who gets to talk to the representative, as opposed to putting out information that is available in other fora, if that makes sense. Okay, cool. And then, yeah, other aspects, whether or not you have your aide manage it. I don't know if anybody does that, but, you know, your aides are contracted to help you in your official capacity as assembly members. So if they're managing your Twitter feed or whatever, it better be, it's best to make that your official one.
So you said there were 3.
Yeah, the third one would be if you're going to be running for re-election, if you're going to have a campaign one, I would ideally have an official and personal and a campaign one, which a campaign one would give you the ability to have a feed where you can talk about issues, you can talk about things, people who disagree with you, you know, that you're actually campaigning on, people who disagree with you, you know, and want to just like troll you on there, you would have a capacity, I would think, to limit that. But you would need to explicitly say, this is the personal Twitter feed for the campaign of member XYZ. And then it doesn't have to be the same feed where you're posting pictures of your, you know, whiskey and ramen meal that you got the other night, right? Like you don't want to put that in the same place you're campaigning, but you can't on an official, you know, municipal assembly member be campaigning. So I would strongly recommend having 3 lanes if you're seeking election, have that third campaign one. And I realize that's a lot to manage, but
My campaign page that I don't
Sorry.
use anymore gets all these crazy notifications from
and then
people
Karen has a
saying it's
question.
going to be ended, and it's really weird. Karen.
So I have a constituent that found my personal Facebook page,
Mhm.
and I just went ahead and friended him.
Mhm.
And he started getting really bad.
Mhm.
He was trolling me pretty hard. And so I just deleted him as a
Mhm.
friend. He's not a friend. But, then he found my assembly page.
Mhm.
And, I'm leaving anything public he says, horrible things about me, but his messages to me, I'm just decided I'm just going to hide.
Thank you.
Is it okay that I'm just hiding his chat messages to me? Because
On your official page?
yeah, because it's
That's all
very
private.
upsetting.
That's all behind the.
Oh, the actual private messages?
Yes.
Oh, not something like posted to your feed.
No, I'm letting those go.
Oh, yeah, no, you can.
But his personal messages
you're
to
getting
me, I
per-
don't want to read.
Yeah, if you're getting personal messages, I would treat like the DMs, as they say.
Yes.
I would treat those the same way that you treat, like an email, right? Like
Okay.
you don't have to. You can delete those, right?
Okay.
Like that is just because a constituent's trying to engage with you, if they're, not doing it in a constructive way.
Thanks.
Doesn't mean you have to read the whole thing.
Matthew, your superhero name is going to be Deadpan. So, this is all lots to chew on. You have more? Oh,
No, this is it.
no, go ahead, Nick.
So actually, I have a question about the messages part. So I am on no social media. I just took the approach of just being done with it. But if you are getting, right, we don't delete our emails. Our
Mhm.
emails are public records.
Yep.
So there's this interesting intersection of what constitutes a public record on social media.
Mhm.
And so I don't know that I would delete
Yeah, that's a good point.
messages to my
Yeah,
official page, but I wouldn't necessarily read them, right? Sure.
Yep.
But you would want to keep the record should you ever be asked to produce
Yeah, that's
it?
fair.
Okay.
And you can unhide them, Mr. Salt.
Yeah, just
So just an interesting question. When can you delete the account?
I would say it would be when you're.
If it's an official account, it's a very interesting question. So.
Official account.
And,
official
yeah,
account.
so there's a very interesting question there. And we haven't taken any sort of action, and I'm not going to recommend it, but there's actually a tool that Facebook has generated where you put a little widget into your official account and it backs it all up so that it's held in the clerk's record keeping process. But if we go down that road, there's an argument to be said, and we've talked about this before, then on that page, our internal Muni service, we actually create those pages. So it's not you out there flying solo. You keep your stuff separate, but on your official page, it's managed inside of the Muni universe. And then you have less liability for it just incidentally going away because we backed up regular. Jamie.
So from a records keeping standpoint, and Matthew can tell me to shut up if he disagrees with me. When I think about a records retention schedule, I'm thinking like transitory conversations, contracts, grant agreements, like all of those types of things. Where does your Facebook page fall in that? And it's transitory. And so I think it's typically 30 days or administrative need. Like once you're done with it, you can be done with it. So that's where I come at it with a records management standpoint.
Yeah, so it's an open question. Mr. Martinez, and we're going to have to kill this conversation in about 3 minutes.
Yeah, just a 30-second reiteration of what you just mentioned, Mr. Chair. That was my thought as well. It's an interesting place to be that we individually create a Facebook account utilizing our own personal email as the entryway into the platform, and then that becomes official rather than the municipality maintaining that somehow, as you described.
Yeah, so that's a broader philosophical conversation. And I mean, you could use your at anchorjk.gov email to start a Facebook page, but it would still be you doing it in your possession. And so it's that possession question that is an interesting one to me. But we'll come back to this. Go ahead, Claire, go ahead. coda us out of this talk.
For those of you who do have pages, I can provide a clip for you about some canned text for an engagement policy that lays out what he was talking about of what is defamatory or unprotected speech that then I think the best practice, a lot of the departments in the city work through it, the clerks, they have it on their page under the about section. But the idea is if it doesn't fit in the policy, you take a screenshot of the comment and then you send the person your policy before you remove the comment. So if anyone, it sounds like you do have social media, want to learn more about that, we can help you with that.
And I have a personal practice when I get an email or a text, not an email, a message in my social media from somebody who's, hey, this is Muni thing. I'm like, I need you to send this to me at the Muni email. Here it is, period. I don't waste time copying and sending pictures because I tell them immediately, this is not the place for that. You have to go here. And I give them a path to do that. And then I just let it go there. And so there are methods. Again, this is an emerging piece. The Supreme Court ruled, but no subsidiary court has then had an opportunity to implement it. And so it's so raw that there's no practical application of the test at this time. I think Matthew's argument to you is don't be the test. So if I could summarize it into just a few words, don't be the test. So, okay, now on to the most important part of the agenda, I think, for today. We had some items at the end of the meeting the other day that we needed some discussion about. This is an opportunity for members to discuss pending business and update from committees. And so I will start going around the room, round robin. Actually, we'll start on the phone. Mr. Martinez.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just be brief. You heard earlier, the one thing that I'll just highlight was Claire Ross mentioned the possibility of the changing the CEDC meeting to once a month rather than two. And I just wanted to make sure that folks who had any strong negative opinions about that had the chance to tell me, heck no, George, don't do that.
I'm not hearing an upswell of demand for more meetings.
Right on. And so what I would encourage though, Chair, is that I will still keep the meeting in the off Thursday to the Enterprise Committee. If the Enterprise Committee is meeting, just all things being equal, I think that double meeting there with the rush to City Hall doesn't, that's a lot. And so keeping it in that way, and I would encourage people to think about any reorganization of time similarly to make sure that things are spaced out effectively. And I do believe this will give, I just want to be clear, I think CEDC has had pretty robust agendas all the way through, even with 2 meetings a month. But I think it could be even more robust and give people the opportunity to do even some more work on those extra Thursdays in between to prepare a little even more effectively. So that's my hope and my proposal and beyond reorganization, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Myers.
Nothing additional to report, Mr. Chair. However, I agree with Mr. Martinez. I wouldn't mind CDEC coming to one time a month and then the alternate week of the enterprise and utility. So I like that thought.
All right, thank you. Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Can folks in the room turn off their mics? Thanks. Yeah, I guess a few things for me. So for the special meeting that we have planned on Thursday, it looks like there's going to be 4 items on the agenda. I think all 4 will be things that we'll need to vote on. We're not going to be able to mash things up into just one item, I think, as some people imagined, mainly because of titles and notice and all that jazz. So we are still looking at putting forward an S1 version of the abatement ordinance that will possibly include some additional changes to the abatement part of the ordinance, removing section 2, perhaps looking at some of the Bronga amendments and some other additional amendments outside of that, some of the issues that the coalition and others have brought up. So you'll see an S1 version. There will be some version of safe parking perhaps including a safe tent or whatever the phrase that was used. There'll be some version of that ordinance as a standalone piece. The criminal element piece will also be there, the Class B misdemeanor. And then I believe there is intent to bring back the sprung structure appropriation and bring that to the agenda for the meeting on the 18th.
Yeah, just to be real clear, it's not to bring back the tent, but to bring back the resolution discussing the tent. And it is on the agenda.
Thank you. Great. So those are the 4 items that are going to be on the agenda. We're going to do our best between now and next week to make sure that all of these things are in final form as possible. I can't promise that's going to necessarily shorten the debate, but at least everything will be in as close as final form as we can agree on. And then there may be some amendments if there are things that we can't agree on.
All right, as well as other delays if things aren't quite sorted yet. So, okay, so I'll go around the room now. If you're done, Mr. Rivera.
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Salt.
Try to be brief, working on pallet shelter to allow pallet shelters communities to be built. So working planning and zoning on that. Also working small boat launch with member Voland and Bronga. Just not that I have a dog in the fight, just trying to put that one to bed. Also introduced or work on public comment period. So I have 2 versions. So just trying to find compromise on those. And then working on what we'll call Project Anchorage with AEDC. And that's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. You don't have anything yet.
Enjoy.
You've been studying hopefully the committees and other things. And so hopefully by the 23rd, you'll have some thoughts on where you want to be and look at the places where there might be some vacancies, because we also need help places where we need effort that might not be your first choice. So Ms. Bronga.
I'm interested in continuing to work on this abatement ordinance, and I don't know if Mr. Rivera would let me work with him and see if we can come to a common ground, but we can talk later about that. I would love to help you with the pallet shelters, Randy. My friend is really interested in getting that going. The other thing that I've been working behind the scenes is today I talked with Kathleen McLaughlin about my private camping idea. She called it the backyard project. But anyway, she saw it as a possibility of a pilot, that we wouldn't have lots of people in the community housing tents, but we start out kind of small with businesses, maybe hosting 3 tents, a few people that we know and trust having someone in their backyard. And she suggested light touch case management, that they would be checking in with someone to make sure everything is going well. So I really want to work on that some more. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up is Jesse Terrell was very interested in increasing participation of young people in voting, and first contemplated trying to do something to lower the voting age. Time just kind of ran out on him. And so the next thing he looked at was changing the structure of the youth representative on the assembly, possibly doing alternating terms where the first one in trains the next one. But that's led me to, and I've got a meeting with him later to talk about, and I know that the assembly recently did something with, I may be giving too many details, but the structure that I'm thinking is that student governments are at every school, and the student governments are youth reps, and they elect, so you get your voting component, they elect the person that attends assembly meetings. So you'd have representatives from each of the high schools, a homeschool, an alternative school, private school, and that's a commission. And so I was thinking maybe we could pause the youth commission, youth program for a bit and see if we can come up with a way to get kids in the driver's seat.
Yeah, so the youth rep application is happening. The youth commission is always subject to change, and that's the Title IV commission, and I look forward to seeing the proposal that comes. And the whole section of the youth member code is up for proposal to change, but at this time, it's open. We're recruiting. We should have it closed in 2 weeks. And so we have actively tried to get young people to apply. We'll see. If we don't get applicants, we might come back to the conversation, but it's highly likely this year at least, the process will move forward for the youth member, because the goal is to get them seated in the summer. So by the time school year begins, they're ready without having to train backwards. So, but don't let that stop you. Much of what we do is for the next cycle. And so but the commission is always subject to change. So I think that's the place to start. So, but look at both. Other projects?
No, thanks, Chair.
Thanks. Mr. Walland.
Thank you. I'm going to be giving at the Transportation Committee presentation on where we might prohibit right turns on red, if anywhere. Thanks.
Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thanks. Just 2 brief updates. We already talked about the ACE fund, the marijuana tax money for early childhood. Just to note, still looking for a 3rd member to work on that since Mr. Cross is no longer on the board or on the body. And then other than that, or regardless of that, we are going to be hopefully introducing an ordinance to create that board. We're working through that process now on the May 7th agenda. So just introduction, but we're working through that process and have gotten feedback. So, and of course that's up for this body's discussion as well. So just a heads up on that. And also talking about kind of the practicality of getting that board constituted, seated, and then what happens with the FY25 budget recommendations, which would be in the fall. So there's some timing issues that we need to think about. So we'll come back to that. But just to say, we're thinking about it, we're working on it. And then on home, just to briefly share, we the 3 sponsors have shared a draft of the comprehensive and land use plan amendments that would be what we believe are necessary or recommended to implement home. That was a piece that had not been completed yet. We had asked staff to let us know if they were going to do that or we would do that. So we ended up doing it. And so those are working through the process. We intend to introduce those on an agenda so that they can be referred to Planning and Zoning Commission. But the idea is that they need to run with that other ordinance. And so if you see it for introduction, it's really so it can get referred to P&Z. And then it will come back to the body, of course, but that's the process. So just to share that update. And I think that's it for me right now.
Thank you, Ms. Solotarola.
So continuing with the home initiative, we have a work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission on May 6th. And at that point, we'll have both concurrent cases. So the current case plus the one that has the land use and comp plan amendments. And then we are back before the Planning and Zoning Commission on the 20th for the hearing on the comp plan and the continued hearing on the initiative itself. So that is the current timeline. Just wanted to let you all know for Open Meetings Act purposes, I have communicated with Karen on the backyard camping in my other capacity, but that counts as one for OMA purposes. So FYI. And I just wanted to let you all know that there'll be a small item hopefully coming soon from Randy, Daniel, and myself on short-term rentals, just asking Treasury to get a little bit more data from the platforms. That's it. But if you see it come back, it's very narrow. Thank you.
PTSD. So, no, just thinking about it all. Like, I did a survey today. There was a survey that we received from a university that's studying the impacts of short-term rentals, and I did it, and it was just interesting. So it's been on my mind today. Okay, a few things. I have an ordinance that's not yet introduced. It's coming soon. It's in final draft form before it gets introduced, and probably not till June. But it's to restructure the Port Design Advisory Board to create, and Ms. Alto as well, the Port Design and Construction Advisory Board. Since we're moving into the construction phase, we want to make sure we have a really clear function, because it was asserted, well, the design's almost done. We probably don't need this board anymore. And I'm like, oh no, now the hard part comes, actually lifting it out of the mud. And so then I have an ordinance on updating some of the tax abatement codes. We have a couple that are set to expire presently in the downtown. And I know there's often conversation about why don't we make that citywide or more broader approach. And so that conversation will likely be coming forward sometime in the not too distant future. But there is a straightforward reauthorization of at least one that I am going to be moving. It's the Fairview one. And so, but it's part of a broader conversation. I have an ordinance drafted in draft form to make it illegal to resell catalytic converters, or not illegal, but require a higher level of identification and tracking of where that piece came from. It's a multi-billion-dollar theft industry in our country. There's an ordinance, I think it was just introduced, relating to police service rates. So when the police are asked to be serving overtime for events and other things, they haven't increased the rates in like 10 or 12 years. And so it's not paying for itself. It's coming out of our budget to support this group having their graduation with 10 cops. And so creates a rolling average increase with CPI, like many of the other things. And these are in various stages, but I'm happy to read them into the record. I'm working on a conversation with our first
Mr. Chair,
responders.
do we need to extend? Move to
Is there any
extend.
objection if we extend for 5 minutes?
Yeah.
And is there anyone from the public that wants to be heard on its participation? I'm hearing and seeing none, so yeah, now it's on the record. To help it make it possible for police and fire to enroll in Social Security, because our benefits package and the way we've structured it doesn't allow them to participate in Social Security. I'm working broadly on an animal welfare update to the code and really pushing the administration to provide a budget proposal for moving us beyond being a kill shelter. We used to be a no-kill shelter. Now, 1 out of every 10 animals we euthanize for space reasons, and we shut down the shelter for receiving animals. And it's very frustrating to me that we've got to do better. And then I'm still working on a project to get APD and AFD sharing radio again, because of a decision that was made some years ago. AFD can't communicate directly to the police department, and that makes our community less safe. Then that's really my list. I have a few other things, but they're not all in the current and contemporary, but just so you know, that's what I've been working on outside of this other stuff.
Chris.
Yep.
Oh, teachers don't have Social Security either.
So interesting. That's a school district group, and I think that's great. We should figure that out. We should at least provide it as an option. I'll ask the school district. I don't think we restrict their benefits as we do our own, and so, but I'll find out. And it would be an option. It wouldn't be a mandate. Like, so, but it's not fair.
There are teachers that don't marry a spouse who has Social Security, because if they get married, they lose that portion. It's a crazy system.
It's not good. So I'm doing some investigation. It's tricky. I think I had one attorney, not of our team, but that was a separate one, who said, I am out of here, not doing it, not it. And so, which I get. So with that, then, if we don't have anyone from the audience, that's my list. We're in this room tomorrow for a number of items. Anyone else last minute? Hearing seen none, we're adjourned. Have a good evening. Wait a minute. Happy birthday, Dean. It's Dean's birthday today.
Happy birthday
To you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Dean. Happy birthday to you. Now we're adjourned.
Should all learn how to sign that, because he didn't have an interpreter.
No, he did. Yeah, on the phone.